Welcome back, guys. This Christmas, I went to Kansas for about a week, and I got into a conversation with a couple of people who were talking about that they feel that kids today should learn to drive a manual transmission or a standard transmission car. And, 10, 20 years ago, I would have to say that that's probably true. Because if your friends are out in public and something happens, one of your friends might have a manual transmission car and you would need to drive it home. But in all honesty, that isn't the case anymore. A manual transmission or standard transmission car used to be popular for a few reasons. Off the bat, in the beginning, every car was a standard transmission. There were no real automatic cars because an automatic was an option. That's why they called it a standard transmission. People drove, manual cars because they were fun to drive. If you had a 3-speed automatic Hemi Roadrunner, that kind of limited how fun it was, but they felt that it was more fun to have kind of a connection to the car, so they bought the 4-speed manual transmissions. But in the 70s, because cars came with 3-speed automatics, people found out you got better gas mileage with a manual transmission, so people started opting for cars with 4 speeds and then 5-speed transmissions. If you're going down the highway and your motor is, turned up, swinging at like 3,000 RPM, you don't get the greatest mileage. That's what happened when you had a 3-speed automatic. But when you had a 4-speed manual, you had that 4th gear, which lowered your rotations per minute, and you would get down to like 2,500 RPM at like highway speeds, and you got better mileage. Well, all the way up until the 90s, even the early 2000s, most automakers were offering 4-speed transmissions, automatic transmissions. So if you got a 5-speed, you still had that one extra gear. Well, that's not the case anymore. Today, even the Corvette, the last Corvette to have a manual transmission was the last generation, the C7. Now it's only offered with an automatic, and that's because automatic transmissions now go upwards of 10, 12, 14 gears if you get a European car. So with that being said, someone asked me, do you think kids should learn to drive a standard transmission vehicle? I would say, where most people would say that would be a skill, I don't know if I would really call it a skill. To me, a true skill is something that will benefit you at some point in your life. A hobby is completely different, or let's say an interest is completely different. I work with aquariums. Is that a real skill? I think it's a real interest. It's something that I'm good at, but there will never be a point in my life where I'm out with 5 people and someone goes, hey man, we're screwed. We really need somebody who knows how to work on an aquarium. No, that'll never happen. Just like people who play video games, there's never going to be a point in real life where there's an emergency that if the person who doesn't know how to play Call of Duty, if he's not there, everyone's in trouble. So I would call driving a manual transmission today an interest, because it's not necessary. 99% of all transmissions sold are automatics now. But I think it's probably something that's fun. It's something to sit around and tell people you know how to do. I've tried to teach multiple people how to drive a manual transmission. My friend Brandy in Kansas, she did really well. I had a 245 Volvo diesel station wagon with a lot of low-end torque, so it was pretty easy to learn. She got up on a hill and she was in traffic and she couldn't do it, and she kind of got discouraged, and well, she hasn't touched a manual since then. Now, has that affected her life in any way? Not at all. She does not have one friend that drives a manual transmission car anymore. Because, like I said, when transmissions come with 10 to 14 speeds, let's be serious. When you're at 70 miles an hour and your car is barely at 1,000 RPM, you're getting great gas mileage, So there's no need for a manual transmission. Most sports cars aren't even opted with a manual transmission anymore. I'd say maybe 1 or 2 of my friends still have a manual transmission vehicle, but that didn't stop me from teaching people. My fiance's daughter, when she was going to college, she had an old beat up Ford Windstar minivan, and that thing got terrible gas mileage, and she was driving from where I live in Pella to Des Moines, Iowa. And that was about a 30 to 40 minute drive. So when I first moved here, I had my Volvo wagon, but I also had a 2001 Chevy Cavalier with a 5-speed that I used to drive in the winter. So I brought that car here to Iowa, and I fixed the rust that was on it, and I put new plugs, new wheel bearing, some brakes. But it was a 5-speed car with a hydraulic clutch. But I had no place to put it because where I moved, I didn't have room. So I saw her daughter had a real need because her van was falling apart and she needed to get a car with better gas mileage if she was going to be able to continue. And she was doing really, really well, and she wasn't far off from graduation. So we were at a park on 3rd Street here in Pella, and I just drove the car up and I told her, get in the car, we're going to learn how to drive a manual transmission. And probably one of the quickest learners I've ever put in a car. Within, I'd say, about 10 minutes, she was fluent. She was driving all around Pella. She managed to get on the highway. So I gave her the car so that she could get back and forth to college. And with 5 gears at that time, she was getting in the mid-30s for gas mileage, so it was perfect. I would say probably the funnest story I have is when I first started visiting here, I had my car that I call Turbo before the motor swap, and I was just parked on the barnyard at the farm that her family owned. And her niece, Shanae, was outside, and she was looking at my car, and she was kind of curious about why it had a manual transmission. And I asked her, she was 13, I said, have you ever thought about driving a manual transmission car when you got older? And she said, I don't think I could do it. So I said, get in the car. And I turned the car over and taught her how to drive, and within a matter of a few minutes, she was driving on the barnyard. We came to the gate to leave the barnyard to go around onto the city street, which went around the block, around the college, and back onto the barnyard. So we get to the gate, and she says, I should stop and let you drive. And I said, I don't think so. I don't want to drive. Just go up on the street. We'll go around. And she kind of freaked out, but then she realized that I wasn't kidding, so she drove around the block, went to a stop sign, got around, and she was just fine. Her mother came over when it was done, and she's like, what is Shanae doing in your car? I said, driving a stick. And she went, she's 13. And I'm like, right, 13, and she's driving a stick. And her mom was like, well, good for you. And that was about it. So I got her learning at 13. I got her daughter learning in her late 20s. So would I say that that's a skill set for them? Shanae, I would say yes, it is, because she now lives in Cambodia. So you can assume that the number of cars in Cambodia that come with a manual transmission is a lot greater than this country. You know, I like to subscribe to a television show that is on PBS. It's been on there since 1981. It's called Motor Week. They now have brand new episodes still airing, but they have the older episodes that they call Motor Week Retro Reviews on YouTube, where they were reviewing brand new cars in the 80s, so you can see what a brand new Cutlass from 1982 would have reviewed like. Well, in 82 they did a Pontiac 1000, which was the Pontiac version of the Chevy Chevette, and it had an automatic 3-speed transmission. And they said that commuter cars were going to automatics mostly because people were tired of exercising their right arm. I personally don't think that's why that happened. I think that in some ways, like I said, gas mileage is now obtainable with an automatic. People, number two, it's really important. People don't want to drive in rush hour traffic, driving a manual transmission. If you've ever been in a city like Des Moines or Kansas City, Chicago, and you're driving a manual transmission, oh, it is a pain in the rear end. So I can see where people went to automatic transmissions. So again, do I think it's a skill that's necessary anymore? Nah, not anymore. Nobody needs to drive a standard transmission car anymore. Nobody really needs to know how to do that to get them through. Unless maybe you work for a mechanic shop or a quick lube place, because there's always going to be one or two of them. But I don't think you're never going to go out with your girlfriends to go have a drink on the town and, everybody gets intoxicated and you got to drive home and drive your friend's car, but oh no, it's a manual transmission. That's just probably never going to happen again. But I think it's something entertaining for people to do. And I think it's something that when people sit around, they can say, it's kind of like what do you call that? A lost art, being able to do something like that. The Toyota Supra, the new Toyota Supra made by BMW and Toyota together, first came out with an automatic, and purists were pretty irritated because they want a manual transmission. The car didn't sell too well. Fast forward 2 years after the model debuted, they put in a 6-speed manual transmission, and everybody was so excited. But see, that's a very rare thing. That's a rear-wheel drive 2-seat Toyota Supra. On a daily basis, you will not go through a Walmart and see more than 3 or 4 manual transmission cars anymore. My friend Heath's Z28 Camaro is a manual, but again, that's a rear-wheel drive muscle car. Daily cars anymore are just predominantly automatics. In fact, I don't think I have one friend that has a manual transmission as a daily driver. So, it's not really that necessary. It's fun, but it's not necessary. I myself don't own a manual transmission car anymore, and it used to be that I would think to myself, "Oh, I can't be a car guy without a manual transmission. I gotta have a stick." Well, you know what? I don't, and I'm not really missing it too much because I have friends. I can drive theirs. But yeah, if people were to ask, do I think that it's necessary? Not anymore. So I hope that answers that question. This has been Salvage Yard Stories. I'm Uncle Dave.